Right. After lots of planning, lots of talk, finally we get George Gammon and Jeff Booth together. Would love to have done this in person, but I think we're in 3 different continents or something. So
probably, yeah.
we will use the power of the internet, and I actually have a feeling you two probably agree on a lot more than you maybe realize or people think. But I think people want to hear this conversation. So I've got a structure. I'm going to keep to my structure. George, you've been on the show before. People know you. Jeff's been on the show a bunch of times and has a book and does a lot of the conferences, but so probably know him a bit more. But so I start with you, George. Just introduce yourself to people if they don't know you already. Just give them your background and tell them why you're here.
George Gammon. Most people probably know me from my YouTube channels. The one is creatively named George Gammon, and where I just do whiteboard videos on macro topics. And then the other one is the Rebel Capitalist channel. And then we've got a podcast called the Rebel Capitalist Show.
Excellent. And look, Jeff, a lot of people who listen to my show know who you are, but hopefully we're going to get some of George's listeners in who might not know you. So give them your intro.
Jeff Booth. I wrote a book called The Price of Tomorrow, Why Deflation is Key to an Abundant Future. Longtime entrepreneur, technologist, now Bitcoin advocate. I started a fund called Ego Death that is investing in layer 2 and everything that's coming to Bitcoin.
Excellent. Right. So this came from a Twitter conversation a while back between the two of you, a short one, and then somebody said, you two should get on a podcast. And I think I just interjected myself and said, I'll host, I'm here. And it took a while to get it together, but here we are. I do think, George, I'm going to start with you. I think a lot of Bitcoiners have you wrong. I think they think you're anti-Bitcoin, and I don't believe you are.
No, not at all.
I just personally, I just think you see it differently from other people. So it's quite a broad question, but could you just start by outlining as best you can what you think of Bitcoin, what your kind of position is with Bitcoin, and where you think maybe there's like this common narrative in Bitcoin or common ideas where you think people have it wrong?
Well, I think that it's not just in the Bitcoin space, it's in the gold space. And I think just it's on Twitter, it's human nature, where people tend to articulate their argument in the form of certainties instead of probabilities. And they talk about solutions instead of trade-offs. So that's kind of where it starts with me. But as far as my position on Bitcoin, I think everyone should own it. But I don't think that everyone should own it because it's going to $1 million. It might, or just get you rich or something like that. It might, but again, we're talking about probabilities. I think everyone should own it to have purchasing power outside of the system, especially moving forward with central bank digital currencies. I think there's an extremely high probability that we'll get that within the next, call it 5 years, something like that. So in that type of world, I definitely want to own physical gold. I definitely want to own some Bitcoin. And I think, unfortunately, we're going to have to play ball. Those people who are, I say us, talking about people who value freedom and liberty and free market capitalism and privacy. For most of the people, I don't think they're going to have a choice because you still have to have a 9-to-5 job. You still have an employer. You have to have a paycheck. I mean, Nigel Farage is a great example of that, you know. I mean, he's still, let's just assume that he's getting paid from YouTube, from his YouTube channel with AdSense or something. He still has to have a bank account for that. It's just, it is what it is. So if they debank him, then that gives those people a lot of power. Where if he just had another bank account or something outside of the system, and then he might be able to navigate that type of situation. But just for the average Joe, you know, they're probably never going to find themselves in the position of Nigel Farage, but just gives them an opportunity to have purchasing power outside of the ecosystem of a social score, let's say. I don't think that Bitcoin is going to give them the opportunity, or even physical gold, to transact completely outside of that system, because I don't think let's say we get a CBDC in 3 years. You know, no matter how fast Bitcoin progresses, I don't know that it'll progress to the point where you can pay all of your expenses unless you want to live like in an Amish community. And if you want to do that, that's great. But for most people, paying their rent, putting their kid through college, medical insurance, et cetera, you're going to have dollars if you're in the United States to do that. You're not going to be able to transact exclusively in that Bitcoin ecosystem. But I think to have some purchasing power, or as much as you can outside, to where you can transact where you can and have that outside of the realm of that social score, I think that's definitely going to be beneficial. And then I also, people say, well, what should I do? What should I do? I know this doesn't apply to a lot of people, but if you have the resources to potentially live in another country where they use cash for a large percentage of their settlement, I'd suggest considering that as a plan B. Because although, as an example, I'm in Colombia right now, will they have a central bank digital currency here? Probably, most likely. But it at least buys you some time for the Bitcoin ecosystem to be built up to a point where it might be more realistic for maybe 80% of your transactions to be within that ecosystem. I just don't think that happens overnight. I think we get a central bank digital currency before then. So that would be my argument for owning Bitcoin. Now, as far as Bitcoin becoming the global currency or a Bitcoin standard, if you will, however you want to articulate that message, I think those probabilities are much, much different. And but then we get into the theoretical, which I think is very interesting. And that's a discussion that I think Jeff enjoys, these thought experiments. But I don't know that Jeff and I would differ on too many things other than just the probabilities.
Okay, that's great. And Jeff, I don't want you to challenge anything George just said just yet. I'd rather you, again, just outline your position, your views on Bitcoin, where you see its role in the world. By the way, I keep looking down here because I'm keeping notes. Yeah. So just to make sure I'm aware of the things you're talking about so I can refer back to them.
Yeah, and specifically, I would say just quickly on George, there's probably not there. You opened it perfectly. There's probably not a lot we disagree with. We may disagree with probabilities, and I'm just looking through probabilities of essentially what happens when you change the structure of something that is uncompromising, and how would that change the reality. So we measure the world out of the existing world. And so it's easy to carry those biases into something new. In fact, every time a company gets disrupted, it gets just disrupted from the exact same reason. And I would argue that disruption is just happening at a level that we can't see because it affects every single other thing. So simply, I'd say that the easiest way to explain this for me is everyone knows technology prices fall to the marginal cost of production over time. You can stop that from happening for a while with regulation, but the process still goes on, and it goes on because competition moves to other regions in the world and then competes with your region that you artificially created a regulatory environment to protect. And then your regulated industry gets wiped out. So over time, prices fall to the marginal cost of production. What is the marginal cost of production of a line of code? Or what is the marginal cost of production of a line of code created by more lines of code? And what you can see is what's happening in the world is we're having exponentially increasing productivity. That exponentially increasing productivity will soon move into robotics, and it won't just be the digital realm. It'll be the physical realm as well. So prices fall to the marginal cost of production will include physical things. So if 1 and 2 are true, which they are true, then you had something. So measuring that happening, to see that happening, you'd have to have a fixed number of units of currency. What that would mean is all prices would fall forever against the fixed prices of currency. So we live in a system that's opposite of that today. We have a system that increases number of units of currency to make prices rise. But measuring from a fixed number of units of currency, what it means is prices would fall forever. Now the question in probabilities, the only question in probabilities is, can it stay decentralized and secure? But if it can, if it stays decentralized and secure, it's inevitable that Bitcoin is repricing the entire existing system rather than the other way around. And when George just said priced in $1 million Bitcoin, I don't think that way. I think anytime you're pricing Bitcoin in a fiat currency that is manipulating the number of units of currency to gain power.
Right, but that's why I also said to get rich.
Exactly, and that we agree, and that's where we agree on, and that's why these things matter. The semantics matter, and people kind of yell on Twitter about the semantics, but I don't think it. I think all it's doing is uncompromisingly, whether it's through deflation or inflation, repricing the world. And if it stays decentralized and secure, then it's inevitable that happens. Now, the time frame, you could argue the time frame, but it is, if it stays decentralized and secure, nobody can change that fact. What it means is you could have blowups, you could have currencies revalued, you could have a whole bunch of things happen along the way, but it is essentially Bitcoin repricing everything else rather than the other way around.
I find myself in this weird position where I end up agreeing with both of you. So I agree with Jeff long term, but actually, George, you're one of my preferred people to see talk about Bitcoin, because most Bitcoiners tend to parrot the same thing or argue about things I'm not interested in. And so when I see you comment, if I disagree, I might post a cheeky reply, but other times I find myself completely agreeing with you. I think you're looking at Bitcoin through some pretty practical eyes.
You know, look, if we lived in a computer simulation, which maybe we do. I mean, sometimes I do the news all the time on the Rebel Capitalist channel, and almost every single day I'm like, we got to be living in the Matrix. I mean, this is like, did you guys see? I'm going to forget my point, but did you guys see the other day that Republic First Bank almost went bust? Not First Republic.
Nope.
Now it's Republic First. Yeah. And I did this story, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me now. This is definitely a simulation. Things are just getting too weird. But anyway, if we lived in this computer simulation, yeah, absolutely. What Jeff is talking about is true, because you've got the deflationary characteristics of human productivity, and then you have a fixed currency supply. My argument is we don't. We live in a world where human beings actually control the money. And if we look back throughout history, you see what human beings always do. It's like clockwork. So I think that if let's just assume we fast forward 20 years or 15 years and Bitcoin is being used as like a global currency, I think it'll be fractional reserve. You'll have fractional reserve banking. And I think Jeff's argument there is that you have instant settlement. But I get why that would potentially reduce the need for fractional reserve lending. But I don't know that it would completely eliminate it, just because as human beings, we're always going to want cheaper credit, and we're always going to want access to unlimited credit. We're always going to want a higher interest rate to be paid on our savings. Now, maybe you won't have banks because you've got, the key characteristics of Bitcoin that differentiate it is you got 21 million, you got a fixed supply, assuming that it's not fractionally lent, and then you can put it in your back pocket and instant settlement. But I don't think that those three characteristics in and of themselves eliminate 5,000 years of human history. And, what's funny is last night, I just had this cold, as you guys can probably tell. So I don't usually watch TV, but I watched a couple episodes of that Netflix series on Rome. And I saw what the crazy kid, Caligula, was doing. And he brought back these treason trials or something like that. And I don't know if this is exactly what he said, but in the series, he goes, well, if you haven't done anything wrong, then you shouldn't be worried that now I have power to destroy your life. And I'm like, wow, it's basically echoing exactly what we hear today. And it's just history just repeats itself over and over and over again. So I go back to the gold standard as an example. The most strict gold standard that we have, example, that's the late 1800s. And so, Peter, let me ask you a question. Between 1880 and 1900, do you think the money supply increased more or less than it did from 2003 to 2023 under a strict or a fiat standard, if you will?
I mean, I'd just be guessing.
It's the same.
Oh, it's the same.
Yeah, so M2 money supply, if you look at it, increased the exact same on a complete fiat standard from 2003 to 2023 as it did under a strict gold standard from 1880 to 1900. So that strict gold standard really didn't limit the amount of currency units, I would argue, at all. And
so, George,
yeah.
this is why this is so critical, and this is why if this is a first time in human history that you could have decentralization and security together, and you could never have that before, because essentially, I've said this many times in many of my writing and such, that I would agree with you on the point that if a money could be corrupted by human beings, it would be. Not it might be. It would be, because it gives so much power to the human beings that corrupt it. So that is, human history is filled with that. And you see it everywhere. And so when you reference this, when gold gets centralized, because of the speed and velocity of markets, you have to build something on top of it, and it gets centralized further and further, and you build fractional reserve on top of it. So I get all of the things you're saying throughout history. The question, and this is the nut of the whole thing, if something has changed history, that we no longer have that ability to change it, then it doesn't get concentrated. So if it remains decentralized and secure, it changes all the rule books going forward.
But it doesn't change people's desire to get a higher interest rate on their savings and to borrow at cheaper costs.
But I get that. So human nature, what you're saying is if we agree with both of these things. I agree with you looking through the history books. I agree with you, and I've talked about it extensively. That is the risk. But if you had something that was decentralized and secure and people held in self-custody, then what that would mean is, as people played these games, these leverage games, and you had deflation into a market, then the higher interest rate and the higher, just like what happened with FTX and everything else, they would blow up faster. And if people remained in self-custody, so if you remain decentralized and secure, I'm not saying that that's a guarantee, because there's so many powers that are going to try to centralize it. But if you remain decentralized and secure, it changes all of what you're talking about going forward.
Let me give an example. Let's just say that I own X amount of Bitcoin, and we're in a world where the world that you're referring to, and I carry 100% of that Bitcoin in my back pocket. So it's completely decentralized, but that's my entire net worth. That's my savings. Yeah. I'm going to want to get a return on that. I know, even with deflation, even though it is increasing in value, I get it. So it's not going to be increasing by a point where I don't want a return on that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find a fiduciary who's willing to take that responsibility. Go ahead. You want to?
Yeah, because that's important. Until they're perfect. But what you're saying now is, I am going to try to trade a return is above the free market by trusting somebody else to get me a higher return, right? And I'm going to centralize by doing it.
Yep.
I agree with you. There's a whole bunch of people that will do that, just like that just did it on FTX, just to try to get a higher return. And I also believe they will get wiped out, because the real return rate, by the way, right now, most people don't know this yet, but you can make about a 3 to 5%. It's not yield, because it comes from fees on Lightning, holding non-custodial Bitcoin. You can hold it decentralized yourself and make 3 to 5%. And I would say that's the true rate of return on the free market with deflation. So deflation, Bitcoin, that means Bitcoin is going to go up in price relative to fiat currency, and people can get it yield. It's from fees, it's not yield, but a real rate of return on Bitcoin now. That you couldn't do that a year ago, 2 years ago. But these instruments, based on the new economic system, are emerging, and more people will I would say take the true yield instead of the leveraged trusting somebody else to centralize. You are right that a free market will emerge, and a whole bunch of people will promise higher returns to try to centralize your Bitcoin. And I am right that if it stays decentralized and secure, if people understand the game that's going to be played, it's inevitable.
Yeah, so let's go back to the 1800s, and you could add full reserve banking back then. You had to put your gold in the bank, but you could have chosen to put your gold in a full reserve bank, and we didn't see those. Why? Because the full reserve bank said, hey, if that guy's going to charge you to hold your gold or maybe pay you 1%, I'll pay you 3-4%. And is there higher risk? Sure. But people chose that over and over and over again. So I don't know why they wouldn't choose that in the future.
So what I suspect, going back to those times, what I would suspect is more people know the difference today. I will tell you that most Bitcoiners that I know wouldn't be trusting to centralize their Bitcoin, and more tools are going to be open to be able to give those people the power to generate economic growth on their own.
Right, but if we're talking about a world where Bitcoin is being used as a global currency, now all of a sudden it's not just Bitcoiners, these crazy guys like us talking about Bitcoin and utilizing it. It's the average Joe and Jane. And the average Joe and Jane.
Can I give some context here,
Sure.
George? I'll give some context here. So previously I had a sponsor called BlockFi who used to offer yield on their Bitcoin. I promoted them on my podcast. I used them myself. I held Bitcoin with them. And they originally offered a pretty good yield. It was around 6% and then 5%. It gradually dropped till it got to, you're getting less than 1%, and there was a limit to how much Bitcoin you could hold with them to get that. And then eventually they collapsed. But at the time, I told myself, this is great, you can get yield in your Bitcoin. And then when they blew up and people lost lots of money and lots of Bitcoin, I actually realized that the return for me, and this is my simple way to look at it, the return for me is the growth in the value of the Bitcoin. And that's worth more than the yield risk of the risk of having the counterparty risk of trying to get yield. So I still want the Bitcoin, but I didn't want to take the counterparty risk to get additional yield. In some ways, for me, the yield is the growing value of the Bitcoin over time versus the falling value of my fiat. Does that make sense to you, Jeff?
Yeah, it does.
I think that equation, though, Peter, I think that's a great
Yeah.
example. But that equation, you might be attaching a appreciation to Bitcoin that might not be realistic in the world that Jeff is talking about. Because right now, Bitcoin is, let's say, a risk asset, or it trades like a risk asset. So you could, in your mind, you're thinking, wow, I could be missing out on a 25% return annually here. That's how much Bitcoin can go up, maybe even more. But in the world that Jeff is talking about, Bitcoin might not appreciate that much against goods and services. You would have deflation, but going back to the late 1800s, we had, I think from 1880 to 1900, we had about 20% deflation. So you would see Bitcoin with a lot less volatility. Well, I guess it would have no volatility, right? But even relative to goods and services, it would be appreciating in value, but not 50% per year or 25% per year. You look at maybe a 2 or 3% per year. So if you knew that your Bitcoin was only going to appreciate by that much, would you still have the same attitude? That would be my question to you.
Should we really be separating kind of almost different Bitcoin epochs? And essentially, we have very early high growth phase now.
Oh, yeah.
Then we kind of maybe have transitional period with lower growth. And then if we reach what Jeff thinks, which is hyper Bitcoinization, it's an entirely new kind of world we're living in.
Yeah.
So yes, and I totally agree with that. But if you play that forward on what's happening, if you just said, that's why I keep just going back to first principles and simplifying this. The question that George is actually raising is, would I do what Peter did and leverage my stuff on blockchain or BlockFi? And would they go broke, or would somebody go broke because of the games? Somebody was always going to give you more margin, and you would chase the margin, and there will be tons of people that get wiped out because of that, and tons of companies that get wiped out because of that, and human nature will drive that. BlackRock is going to do an ETF. Some people are going to put it in there. That's going to be a centralizing function, and there's going to be a whole bunch of these. And if these games are played on top of this, and it breaks the decentralization security, I would say George is right. I suspect that won't happen. And I suspect that won't happen because of things like this conversation. And if you just follow first principles, prices follow marginal cost of production, exponentially increasing productivity, and if it stays decentralized and secure, meaning if people self-custody and it stays decentralized and secure, and don't play as many of these games, it effectively is going to wipe out people that are playing these games and keep on going. So what you're talking about in the early epochs versus the later epochs is the exact same trend that is saying, and that is repricing today's global wealth, let's call it 900 trillion, into 21 million. And that'll come, and it'll feel like, but most people are measuring from their US system or Argentina system or whatever debasement they're taking on their currency. They're measuring Bitcoin in their currency. So what it's actually saying is they're trading Bitcoin. They're traders, right? And what's actually happening is Bitcoin is repricing it all. And so the speed of, when you're talking about the epochs, you're talking about the speed of repricing. And that speed of repricing is going to be changing over time, because currencies could, let's use an example I use often. In Argentina, it's not like there's 100% Bitcoiners. Why not? So in this case, George is right? They got 120% inflation, and everybody is leaning into the system, thinking there's a fix from within the system, and they just got rug pulled on their currency. And then because of that currency devaluation, investment will race in, take advantage of cheap labor. People will be fooled into that again, and then they'll get rug pulled again. And each time through that thing happening all around the world, it's going to create more and more Bitcoiners. But the repricing that we're talking about is as a result of all these things happening.
Yeah, but if you go to Argentina, what are they using, Jeff? They're using dollars.
Yeah, and Bitcoin
and
gotten
rug pulled. And I'm not saying that it's a panacea. I'm not saying it's great, but I am saying that that's part of the network effect that the dollar has, is that you go to Turkey, which I've been there recently, you go to Argentina and you look in the cash register and they're not using Turkish lira and Argentinian pesos. It's full of dollars. And it makes sense, if you're them.
I totally agree with that. And in fact, it gives the system more strength, right? Because all of those areas that are defaulting or debasing are making their currencies cheaper in the U.S. Relation, and allowing the U.S. to export more inflation around the world, and strengthening. So network effects of something like the dollar don't end overnight. This is something I totally agree.
That's going to be one that, in my opinion, is probably the biggest challenge that Bitcoin faces, as far as taking it to its last bucket or epoch, whatever you want to call it, to where it becomes the global currency. Is just, we've never seen a network as powerful as the U.S. dollar ever in human history. And so,
but then
it's a lot.
If you ask that,
for Americans, it's hard for them to understand, because their expenses are denominated in dollars, and therefore they see their expenses go up. They see the dollar lose value. But if your expenses are denominated in another currency, such as the Colombian peso, where I'm right now, holding dollars, you actually would have increased your purchasing power relative to local goods and services, because until recently, the dollar had appreciated so much relative to the peso. It appreciated more than the rate of local inflation. And so that's very, very powerful, especially when that's happened over decades and it's generational. Even if the dollar loses, let's say 1% relative to local goods and services annually, that's something that people can depend on. So I'm not here to cheerlead for the dollar or anything, but that is part of the probabilities, right? That's part of the whole equation when you're trying to think about when or if Bitcoin could replace something like the dollar. But one thing I also wanted to throw in there, because we were talking about getting a percentage, an interest rate on your savings, but it's not just that. I think it's the debt side that would really, there'd be a lot of demand for fractional reserve, because, I think people are still going to want to borrow money. They're still going to want to borrow Bitcoin. They want to buy a house. They don't have the money. And even if it's not fractional reserve, if it's full reserve, they're going to be paying a much higher interest rate, where you've got a bank that comes out and says, listen, we'll do this fractional reserve stuff. And we've done it in the past. It wasn't a big deal. And instead of having to pay an 8% mortgage, now you only have to pay a 5% mortgage. So I think people are going to gravitate towards that as well. So I think you will have demand from the wanting to get a higher interest rate on your savings, and then also because it's cheaper. It's cheaper to borrow, and I think that's one of the main reasons. There's a lot of them, but one of the main reasons why we see so much dollar-denominated debt right now. Why does Argentina, have so much dollar-denominated debt? Because it's cheap. Because they can borrow dollars at 3 or 4%, when they can borrow pesos at whatever 15, 20%, and so that entrenches that network, and I think that's what people will gravitate towards.
Yeah, George, you're right on some of this, but if you're denominating in Bitcoin, you can already see what's happening, right? So 3 years ago, my lake house cost 300 Bitcoin. My lake house has gone up about 20% in those 3 years, maybe more than that, and now my lake house is 50 Bitcoin, right? So when you're talking about I'm going to lever into a different system, you're actually saying I'm going to pay way more into and all the debt and everything else. Whereas if you're talking about Bitcoin, you're actually repricing everything over time.
Yeah, I understand. But if I want to buy your lake house for 50 Bitcoin, and I don't have the 50 Bitcoin, I want to borrow it, and I want to borrow it at the cheapest interest rate.
Yeah, and you will try, or you will keep on saving in Bitcoin and buy it outright.
Yeah, but who does that, Jeff? I mean, I get, in an ideal world, I get it. Maybe the Japanese do that to a greater degree than Americans. But as Americans, I just, to think that we're going to transition into this world in 20 years when no one's going to want debt, or no one's going to want a car loan or a mortgage, I just don't think that's realistic.
This is actually why in this kind of American focus, because American focus is the US dollar, and it's had so much network effect we take for granted. My entire life has been building networks and technology and understanding network effects. It's how I came up to the thesis that I did, and understanding how powerful network effects. In fact, 70% of all value created in technology companies is due to a network effect. The U.S. dollar has the same network effect, and it drives all of our purchasing. Totally understand, and so. What ends up happening, though, is what ends up happening to a monopoly with network effects, once the network effects start ending, right, is people don't see it. And they do the same thing that Kodak did, inventing the digital camera. And what ends up happening is the network effect moves to the people furthest away from the monopoly. So what's happening right now through Bitcoin is it's moving, because I've never seen something in human history. I haven't seen an example of something that offers way faster, cheaper, and safer that is lost, that is open to anybody to play, that is ever lost against a monopoly, ever. And what is happening right now at Bitcoin, why it's moving from the bottom up, why you'd see El Salvador move to it first, why you're seeing all these other countries move to it first, is because it's enhancing their ability to compete. And you're going to see this, and I see it because I'm at the nexus of that all around the world. I know Peter's traveled around the world seeing this as well. And when you see this impacting communities at a level outside of what we're talking about, in what protects the monopoly, you understand it's unstoppable. If it stays decentralized and secure, it's unstoppable. And so you have a new, more powerful network effect that's emerging from the bottom up. And what I would say is most people are misunderstanding vastly, dramatically, what that means to the existing network effect. Not that it'll end tomorrow. I totally agree with you there. But by the time, as you have something that gets more and more powerful with every node and every user that joins it, it becomes more powerful to the point, and the monopoly can't avoid it.
Yeah, but people
let me throw my context. Yeah, let me throw my context, then put a question to you, George. So in the last couple of months, I've been to both Argentina and Lebanon.
Yeah.
I try to go to two of the countries that have got some of the worst inflationary issues, and to make a documentary to understand what is happening. And quite rightly, as you've both alluded to, most people don't want Bitcoin; they want dollars. And the reason they want dollars is it's the closest thing they have of a real world experience to their local currency, the way it operates and they use it, but it's stable. So it's not volatile. The problem with both of these countries is so many people have been pushed below the poverty line. They can't afford to think about something like Bitcoin and its volatility and spend time on the technology and understanding it. Most of them are just trying to live day to day. So they want a dollar and they want to protect their income and grow their business. But what I have found in these countries is there is more openness to Bitcoin than, say, I would find in the UK with my friends. And I think what that is Bitcoin is slow to adopt, but in these countries, there are some people who are skipping the dollar step, or they're doing the dollar step alongside Bitcoin. But I do think a lot of Bitcoiners have this wrong in thinking like Bitcoin can fix Lebanon. No, it can't. Property rights, rule of law, security, and a stable currency. But what was really interesting about Lebanon, it's now a cash dollar economy. There's no banking infrastructure. It's a cash dollar economy, and people have found a way. My question to you really is, George, is that one of the interesting things about Bitcoin is kind of unstoppable in that it just comes at you. So is there a possibility that whilst people may want to borrow money, that Bitcoin forces a new world where it just changes that and they just can't, and we have to adapt to the world that this almost organic protocol creates?
No, but then the free market's going to provide it, Peter. If people, want lending, if they want fractional reserve banking, if they want cheaper interest rates, if they want to be paid higher on their savings, then someone's going to step in and offer that to them. And that's just the way the free market works. And like the point I was making earlier, historically, we just see this happen over and over and over again. So in the future, and I get the three main components here. You've got a set amount. You've got the ability to keep your purchasing power in your back pocket. In other words, decentralization. And Jeff makes a great point, and Lynn has made this several times as well, about instant settlement. That you might not need as much credit if you can settle instantly compared to the gold standard when you had to ship gold, from one place to the other, and it took 3 months or so. But again, I think that human nature is going to kick in, that greed, that desire. And we're just going to, although we might move to a Bitcoin standard as a result of the fiat system completely collapsing, eventually in 30, 40, 50 years, you're going to land right back where we are today. You're going to have those derivatives. You're going to have the Bitcoin money supply growing exponentially because of governments and people wanting to vote for stimulus and whatnot. I just think I think that is as close to inevitable as possible. I wish it wasn't that way, but
where does that stimulus come from?
I actually don't think that that's right. I think that that's where we disagree. But again, we're talking about probabilities here, and we're talking about human nature and what's happening, and so we can disagree around the edge there and see what's happening. And what I would say is, when I look at how few people in the world are good at seeing second and third order problems or opportunities out of something that's changed, and how few people kind of predict the future and they predict their present forward. You get into most times these things being wrong. So you have to kind of update your probabilities with what would happen here with taking those inputs.
But it's human hardwiring, Jeff. I'm not talking about something as far as technology or whatnot. I'm just talking about human greed.
I know.
Changes.
So I get what I'm saying is I think what you're doing in this is I think you're taking, in fact, I would say some of the world that you're describing today, governments have all this power, they're going to have all this power and everything else. That this is the way it looks, and we will make sure that happens because we reinforce that system and we give them the power. Everything we do, we give them the power, and we give them the power because of this. Similar to what you're saying. If the free market is deflationary, period, and we have inflationary money, that means we don't actually live in a free market. So what you're talking about is we will vote. So the free market takes it, and then we will vote to abandon the free market and give government more control to be able to protect us from the free market. That's kind of what
I'm just saying that in that world, I think people are still going to vote for higher taxation. And I think as time goes on, especially if that wealth is consolidated, if that wealth is centralized in people's back pocket and not everyone has access to it, then I think that's going to increase the probability that people vote for more government handouts and therefore taxes increase even in Bitcoin. I mean, I like to point out that right now, at least back in 2015, these are the last numbers that I have, so I assume it's much, much higher now. The amount of tax revenue, I'm not talking about spending, I'm talking about revenue that the government receives as a percentage of GDP is over 30% when you look at state and local and federal. And I think now it's over 40%. So
why
this has
is
nothing
that?
to do with deficits. It has nothing to do with money printing or bonds or anything like that. This is just tax revenue. And to your point, Jeff, people voted for that. So why would they not vote for that in the future? And I think that pertains, because a lot of people are saying, George, how are you connecting the dots there? I think that pertains to inflation, because as government spending as a percentage of GDP goes up, I think that in and of itself is inflationary, potentially even with a fixed money supply. But again, I think this always goes back, Jeff, to in the future, people are going to want to borrow money. They're just going to want to borrow money, and they're going to want to borrow it at the lowest interest rate, and they're going to want to get the highest return that they deem as safe on their savings. And I just don't see how technology or Bitcoin or anything on the planet Earth changes that.
Okay, hear me out then on this, because I think in this is the crux of where we disagree on what I believe is going to happen, which is inevitable. If this stays decentralized and secure, and we can't negotiate with that decentralization and security, it's just the next block, next block, next block. Then it is, as we said, if it stays decentralized and secure, you can assign a probability to that. Then what I said will happen, and it'll blow up, and the existing system will keep blowing up. And we will vote
in that world, Jeff. People don't want mortgages, right?
I'm not saying. Let's just stop. Okay. It doesn't matter whether they want or not.
Okay.
Right? It doesn't actually matter, because what it matters is as they take more mortgages, and if house prices climb relative to that, and deflation is a forced part of the market, meaning prices fall the marginal cost of production, and house prices don't receive a premium to store your wealth, and they start falling to a utility value, then it means that one side of that other, one person or the other, probably both, are going to be wiped out in counterparty risk, no matter what, right? And that's going to happen. So I agree with you that people are going to do that. I agree with you largely, but it doesn't matter if it stays decentralized and secure. It doesn't matter. They will get wiped out. Someone will get wiped out.
But they didn't get wiped out to the point where it mattered in the late 1800s.
But again,
why?
Because
what you're saying is it's in the back pocket. I get it, but now we're just comparing full reserve and fractional reserve.
So
why did fractional reserve win out?
But let's just keep going, because there's so much power in governments to be able to save us.
But people wanted fractional reserve, Jeff. It wasn't the government mandating.
I know.
Free banking. I mean, you know that. The government wasn't involved there.
But hear me out. When free banking collapses, then people tell the government to be able to save them, and regulation comes in. And then you have bigger banks that creates more risk, and not free markets that get worse and worse. So you're right. I'm not arguing that. I'm talking, if this stays decentralized and secure, it doesn't matter if you're right. It doesn't. They're going to get wiped out. It's going to continue.
You don't think the government's going to bail them out?
And the government is, and then the government, just like the government bails out everyone in 2008 and centralizes control, and because there's not the tax revenue to do that, they have to expand government to be able to do it.
And pointed out that right now we've got, let's just say, 40% of GDP in tax revenue that people are voting for.
So I get it. And so if you're running an inflationary monetary system against a deflationary real world that's imposing physical restraints and physics restraints, then you're going to get wiped out faster. And whether you're a government getting wiped out faster, unless you're maybe the short-term debt cycle turns into long-term debt cycles, turns into the government debt cycle as you kick up debt that can't be repaid. And then what do? Over time, You monetize that debt. Why do you monetize that debt? Because because if you let a deflationary collapse happen, everything would break. And so would you vote? I ask Bitcoiners all the time this. Would they vote to have their income, to have their real income go up each year, even though their income might come down each year? But they but their purchasing power would increase each year. Would they vote for that government? And most people would say no chance. I'll wait for prices to come down, then I'll maybe get a little bit less and I'll get more. So I agree with you. Human nature is biased in the system that we live in. And they'll vote for people who will tell them. And what that means, what I just said means, is we vote for people we know are lying to us, and we're taking away our individual rights and freedoms as we transfer more control to people that are lying to us. It's just theater on top of a broken system, and we knowingly do that, and that I agree with. But this is imposing imposing restraints to that.
Do you think people do truly vote knowing that? I think you understand the theatre. I think you understand the economic arguments, but I think the vast majority of people have no idea. I don't think a lot of people know where the money comes from. They just think the government has endless money to solve their problems. I think this is one of the issues now, is that I think the majority of voters don't understand, and they think voting for an alternative party is going to change things. Whereas actually, it's successive administrations, whether it's the UK, Europe, whether it's US,
Canada,
whether it's Japan, Canada, that have actually successive administrations from different political parties that have done exactly the same thing to the money supply.
They have to.
I would argue they have.
That's not my question.
But that takes us down a whole nother rabbit hole. The banks have.
Yeah, it's happened under their watch. I mean, my question is still the same though, Jeff. You think we knowingly vote for this, but do you think enough people actually are voting knowing what's really happening?
I think people are starting to look outside what's happening. I think Bitcoin and what we're doing Bitcoin is part of that kind of early knowledge sharing. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Now, and that is building. Now, how early we are on Bitcoin. This is something that's very, and we're talking about this future playing out. So I understand all of these concerns about and how it's looked for the last 5,000 years and how would this look different. I totally get that, but the how early we are on this is I think driving this, because most people are carrying their baggage from the existing system, that it's everything they know, and the smarter you are at that existing system, the more ingrained you are, even if you hate it, even if all the things that you don't like about it, that you're concentrating more power in government all the time, the more that you know that, the likely more you are, it's harder to see what the imposition of these rules creates for new rules, how the emergent complex behavior of society emerges on top of a different set of rules that slowly transitions. And I think what we're seeing is just the early bridge to the other side. And depending what view of the world you're living through, if you're living through the fiat lens and all of these things are happening, and we have $400 trillion of debt in the world that's insolvent. It's completely insolvent. So the only way to pay that back is financial repression.
Or velocity.
Yeah, but financial repression, but the economy. We talk about technology all the time. Look at what's happening with artificial intelligence. It's more deflationary. So what's giving rise to the debt and the debt that's not able to repay is you're going to have to grow economies faster than that, and that is a deflationary impact. So what's happening is you're adding monetary supply to pretend that can be repaid, and it can't. It's financial repression. The only way to financial repress people is to control the narratives of communications and lock them into a burning building. And so the confusion right now all around the world where you're going with CBDCs, where you're going with different political parties saying this and dividing people, is out of the exact same thing. It has to get worse. And if you're measuring the world from that fiat lens, it will get worse.
No, but look, fiat lens has nothing to do with in 2020, we have a global pandemic and people want stimmy checks. So let's just assume that we're in the Bitcoin standard world, right? It's not going to eradicate war. It's not going to eradicate disease. It's not going to eradicate famine. We're human beings. We're imperfect creatures in an imperfect world. The shit's going to hit the fan. And what we've seen over and over and over again, when shit hits the fan, no matter how great your system is, people put that system on pause. Going right back to the Roman thing that we were talking about. How did Julius Caesar become a dictator? Right? It's because the shit hit the fan in Rome, and they said, yeah, let's go ahead in this republic thing. Let's go ahead and put it on hold for a moment, and we'll just give Caesar dictatorial power for the next 10 years because we have to. And it's you look at World War I, World War II, the Civil War with the Legal Tender Act of 1862. Again, look at what happened in 2020. If that type of thing happens again, regardless of what your monetary system is, people are going to want to kick the can down the road. People are going to want a quick fix. And if increasing the currency supply is that quick fix, that's what people are going to demand. They're going to take the pitchforks and the torches.
Perfect. I agree with you. Perfect. That will happen. We know a whole bunch of monetary easing is coming. We know if they tighten this, that you're going to move into, they continue to tighten. Eventually, you're going to move into a deflationary spiral. You and I both know that. We know that massive liquidity is coming at some point, might be 10 months away, but at some point, there's going to be massive liquidity. In either case, Bitcoin is just a ledger. It doesn't care. All of this stuff going on that you're talking about, it doesn't care. It's repricing this.
But we're talking about increasing the currency supply. We're talking about creating paper Bitcoin.
No. We're talking about increasing the. Right now we're talking about increasing the currency supply. Because what will people do? They're not going to say increase the currency supply of Bitcoin. And P.S. If they did, good luck. They're going to say increase the currency supply to make sure I have enough money.
Yeah.
Which will transfer more power to governments. Which will those governments will be able to surveil you and do anything you want to be able to change it. And so that is going to happen in the existing system. You and I both agree on
in the
that.
Bitcoin system.
No, why in the Bitcoin system?
Because if you have a global pandemic, Jeff, if you have World War III in the Bitcoin system, and the people in the government see creating more currency units as a solution, that's what's going to happen. If people are that scared shitless, they're not going to sit there and have some philosophical view about the monetary system. They're going to want it fixed ASAP, regardless of what the long-term consequences are.
So this is where I think you're bringing your knowledge of the existing system and into the new, and not Bitcoin is repricing this system. It has 21 million fixed. It doesn't matter what this system does. If you're measuring the world from it and all of this stuff that's going to happen in the existing system, you're right. Bitcoin is fixed. If you're arguing that one day, because what would happen on the Bitcoin system? What would happen in the Bitcoin system is government would have to get smaller.
Why?
It would have to.
Why?
Because
people didn't vote that way, Jeff. The government would not have to get smaller. They just back
I know.
Bitcoin. It's just Bitcoin's
El Salvador's government just got smaller.
But they didn't have to. That's because the people voted that way. And this goes back to, people always ask me, George, what's the solution? What's the solution? If Bitcoin's not the solution, what is it? Unfortunately, the only solution we have is convincing people that small government is the way you have to vote. And if you vote for big government, regardless of the monetary system, you're going to get inflation. I would argue you're likely going to get inflation, consumer price inflation, even if you have a very limited or a fixed money supply or a money supply that grows very slowly.
So what do you think? So right now, governments like El Salvador and others that are coming, what do you think is happening to people who are moving there and voting with their Bitcoin? What's happening is the economies are more prosperous as a result of being more fiscally responsible, and their government budgets are coming down as a result of that. That is what's going to attract my Bitcoin. I will just tell you, because I could move anywhere. and I just get up on a plane and go anywhere, I would not go to a place that is saying we're going to charge you 40% taxes to be able to carry on all this nonsense. I know a whole bunch of people in the existing system will, though. That's the point. This imposes a change, and it imposes a change from the bottom up to governments as well. It imposes a change on a systematic, emergent, complex behavior that you couldn't impose because people wouldn't do it unless you had a system that imposed that change.
Okay, so again, when you get a crisis situation, even in El Salvador, and people see the solution as going off the Bitcoin standard, they're going to go off the Bitcoin standard. Or what they're going to do is the exact same thing that we did in 1862. They're going to say, yeah, we've got this gold stuff, and I realize you guys like that, but now what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to start taking these green pieces of paper. And if you don't, we're going to put you in jail.
Perfect. And when they did, if they did, a whole bunch of people would say, okay, I'm out of El Salvador now. I'm going to somewhere who treats me and my money.
But Jeff, let's be honest. Are you married?
I am.
Okay. Do you have kids?
Yes.
How old are your kids?
19, 17, 15.
Okay. So I'm assuming they're in schools that they've gone to for quite some time. You guys have chosen those schools carefully. So why don't you move to El Salvador right now?
So I've been there. I visited.
Yeah. Your wife a big fan of El Salvador?
Is
your wife a big fan? Your kid's a big fan of El Salvador?
Yeah, they enjoyed it a lot.
And they want to go to school there?
So George, right
you
now,
see where
again,
I'm going with this, right?
Jeff, could I just jump in here? I think George is making a good point here in that, look, I'm in the UK and I'm paying over 50% tax. And that doesn't include all the other taxes I have to pay and the tax I'll pay when I die. But my kids are in school here. I could move to Monaco or I could move to El Salvador. We're happy here. My kids
Jeff and I could both move to Puerto Rico and pay zero
and
tax.
Interestingly, we could find examples of people who will do, but I don't think the majority, you're not going to suddenly see 60 million people from the UK up their sticks and go down. I think it's usually an edge case where people actually make that change. I think he's making a fair point.
Yeah, what I would say is I actually don't understand that point. And this is why. Right now, today in Canada, and I still have friends here, schools here. By the way, George, we just traveled for the last 2 years. We took our kids and put them in online school, and we traveled for the last 2 years.
Are you in Canada, Jeff?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. And so, but I still have lots of friends here and everything else. But I have decreased my investment here and houses, real estate, everything investment here in favor of where I'm building to, the world I'm building to, what's happening on Bitcoin. As a result of what I see is happening, I've also seen areas in the world, and I'm looking at having the flexibility of golden visa opportunity in different areas of the world that I could move. Because if you understand what's going to happen in the existing world, is it's not going to look the same as we thought it looked before. You're going to have to retain flexibility in the world we're moving into. So if you're talking about me specifically, we just spent 2 years on the road. I'm investing, and I'm on the leading edge of this all over the world, seeing where it's going. And that there's lots of different opportunities for myself, my family, and my capital. And I'm retaining flexibility. Right now, this is still home. But would I choose that if things changed here? Of course I would. And I would suggest that other people should start taking a hard look at that too.
I think the main point there, though, is even in a perfect society with a perfect monetary system that's booming, you're going to have hits to that. You're going to have tsunamis. You're going to have, let's say, the cerveza sickness. You're going to have a war. And it is true, you might be able to pack up and go somewhere else, but a lot of people won't want to do that. And therefore, I believe, just looking at 5,000 years of human history, that they're going to choose to, let's say, manipulate that perfect monetary system that they have in order to alleviate any short-term pain. And that over time, doing that over and over and over again, it's like a death by 1,000 cuts. Pretty soon, over decades, you get to a point where the world or even that economy looks very similar to the one that we have right now.
So rule of money is superordinate to rule of law. You would agree with that, right?
It's going to gravitate to rule of law for the most part, yeah.
So if it didn't look like that, the places with the most broken money would have the best rule of law. Rule of law is subservient to money. So if you have broken money, then rule of law just breaks faster and faster and faster. And why there's so much power in money, in trying to destroy money, is exactly the same thing I just said. If you control the money, you control the world. And people don't know how important that is, and they don't know how important it is for their own life and safety and work and everything else. And so what you just described as this gets worse is different places in the world look like different countries in Africa right now, and they get worse and worse and worse. And some countries operating on a Bitcoin standard get better and better and better. And that is the world we're going to move through in the next for the foreseeable future. It's kind of frightening in some cases, but if you're on the right system, I tend to ask myself this question, a really simple question, to try to get out of the noise. What would life look like? What would the emergent complex behavior of all of our actions look like on a system that required theft in the base layer of money? Who would win? Who would lose? What would it look like over time? And if that theft had to get worse and worse to protect a financial system that was based on a lie, what would it look like? And then what would the emergent complex behavior look like of society on a system? Because all it is an honest ledger. What would that look like?
Sorry, can I just throw in the real world examples for context? Because I've just been, as I said, Argentina and Lebanon. They've both been through Argentina, I can't remember when it was, but I always pronounce this incorrectly, Le Corralito, where basically they woke up one day and the government stolen all their money. Lebanon's been through the same. Not only have they had their deposits stolen from their bank accounts, but they've also had their currency destroyed by massive inflation. And have they seen a mass exodus of people? Not really, but you see half an exodus, and the half an exodus you see is the youth leaving. So that's a pattern I've seen. That the youth or the parents are trying to get their children to leave. So in Argentina, people are going to Australia, the UK, America, because there's no future. They can't get jobs. If you can get jobs, they can't afford a house, and there's high inflation. Exactly the same things happen in Lebanon. The diaspora is huge, but almost anyone who can afford to get their kid out of Lebanon to America, Canada, somewhere else, they do. So there's kind of like, Jeff, what you're saying is kind of half right. Like it's the youth that tends to leave, but older people tend to stay. And that's real world examples where everyone's had all their money stolen and the economy destroyed. So when you say people may leave, actually, we can see they don't. Sometimes they will put up with the worst situations and stay
Peter,
in the country
I'd
they
also
love.
point out, going back to 2020, I think even for the average Joe, I don't think you need a PhD in economics to know that those stimulus checks were going to create consumer price inflation. And you had literally zero.
Paul Krugman didn't know.
Zero. Okay, fair point. but no, seriously, anyone in the Bitcoin space, or I think anyone with just some common sense, can say, okay, we're increasing the amount of currency units in the United States by 20 or 25%. That's probably going to have some long-term negative effects. That's probably going to create some consumer price inflation. But yet you had almost zero people say, yeah, I don't want that stimulus check. Or yeah, that PPP loan for $5 million. Nah, I don't want that. I don't want that because I know that's going to create consumer price inflation. Nobody said that. Nobody said that. And that I think that really illustrates my point better than anything.
Mind you, if you say that same point was the point Ross Stevens, Michael Saylor, a whole bunch of others found religion on Bitcoin and started advancing that. And that's my point. My point is the more this happens, the more volatile this gets, the more people that are coming over to understand the new system and the more people that are building on the new system. George, I wish, and maybe this is offline, a different thing, I wish you could see what I see on the type of things that are being built on top of this layer 2 and layer 3 now, and how fast that's going to emerge And when I say fast, I'm not saying it changes our time frame as far as tomorrow everything changes to Bitcoin standard. I'm saying I couldn't imagine putting my money anywhere else because my return is going to be so high, and not just a return on in capital, but a return on my time working with kind of the best people in the world, building a system that works for everybody. It's incredible. And if you saw what that looked like and what that meant to how you're measuring Bitcoin today versus what is building right now, that's going to be brought forward, it might change your mind on some of this.
Well, and again, I want to be very clear, and that's why I tried to compartmentalize right at the beginning of the conversation, that let's just assume for a moment that Bitcoin never, ever, ever became a global currency. Let's assume for a moment that they did, or that we fractional reserve lent it. There's paper Bitcoin. There's more than 21 million. That all these things that I'm talking about. Let's say that comes to fruition, but let's also assume that Bitcoin gives us the ability to transact outside of the system. Even in that world, I think there is massive, massive, massive value. And Bitcoin is sensational. And Bitcoin will, in my opinion, overachieve, right? Even if, let's just assume it's inflationary. Let's assume it loses 5% per year in its purchasing power relative to goods and services, but it still gives us a way to transact outside of the system. I still think that's a win. I still think that's a huge win. And I still think that in and of itself is worth people allocating time, energy, capital, and maybe their lives into figuring out. Because if you look at that type of world, a CBDC world where they're monitoring every single transaction and they control completely who gets credit, and they're doing that based on narrative instead of merit, and all these things that we are concerned with. Again, if you've got a release valve for that, then this is fantastic. I mean, this is something that should be applauded, and this is basically winning the war, even if it loses purchasing power every single year.
George, you really sure that many people care about that?
It depends. It goes back to how the government is utilizing it, right? So I think that if my base case actually is that the government utilizes this in the same way that it utilized the I don't know what they're called, the passports. You get the shot, and you get the. I want to keep it YouTube friendlier. But if you had that, let's say, medicine passport in Texas, it didn't matter because no one was checking it. But in New York, it mattered a lot. Or in Canada, I think it mattered a lot. You had to have that, or you couldn't even go to a restaurant. You couldn't take your kids out. You couldn't do these things. So I think in a CBDC world in the United States, it could get to the point where everyone's got a social score, but in Texas, it really doesn't matter. But in New York, it really does. In California, it does. In Canada, it does. Australia. And then there's some parts of the world where I think that they're that it's very draconian. But I think that's something that the people will vote for because it'll be presented to them as a way to protect them from disinformation and misinformation and all these evil characters like Russell Brand and the bad actors. And it's a way to get people. It's a way to make Rumble go bankrupt, so we don't have these people manipulating the minds of our youth and whatnot. So I think that if it goes too far in that type of world, then I do think people will push back and people will seek this out. But let's just assume for a moment you're right, Peter, and they don't. Let's assume that the majority of the average Joe and Janes continue to be plugged in to the matrix, if you will. Even if it allows those people, let's just say 5% of the human population to unplug from the system, I still think that's a win. I still think that's huge.
Yeah. So George, this is the piece, and I think this is probably where people say, "Do you have an alternative?" That they probably say it in a different way than maybe it comes across to kind of say, "I'm a Bitcoin maxi." And when I say Bitcoin maxi, it means I've done the work down to the sand on this to say how would I I would try to disprove my hypothesis over and over and over and over again, and not being able to. and realizing that Bitcoin is decentralized and secure, is I wanted to spend more time building the world I wanted to see instead of yelling at the world that I saw. And even in that, I would say, and I've said it a number of times on different podcasts, I was a hypocrite for a while because I held a bunch of wealth in Bitcoin. And so I was safe. But all of my money-making activities were in the fiat system. I was on a bunch of different boards in the fiat system and everything else. So over 90% of my time, besides podcasts and such, were in the fiat system. I realized, I'm exactly what you described before. I'm spending the time inside this system, making it stronger, while talking about a new system. And why I started the venture capital company is to invest more of my time, all of my time, inside the system I wanted to see emerge. Because I can't get past this. And I found it in myself too. I can't get past this. You're right about human nature. And most of the people on Twitter and maybe even on your podcasts and everything else, we're making a system stronger by yelling at the system. World Bank, all of these systems, they're just taking all of the money that we make inside that system, advances a system that takes away our individual rights and freedoms at a faster and faster rate. And it has to, because that entire system is based on theft, and nobody will vote for that system going through the deflationary spiral. So it has to. And what I realized is I could do that too, and I could spend a lot of my energy doing that, or I could just change my energy and I could put it into the system that started emerging the other way, because it was the only way outside of that system that I had a way to solve the problem. Everything else strengthened the existing system. No matter if I yelled at it, I would have more people saying, yeah, you're right. But they too would be strengthening the existing system too. And what I realized, I need to just exit and spend more time building the world I want to with the people I wanted to.
Yeah, I think there's, like I said, massive value in a parallel system for sure. But I do see that parallel system evolving from a monetary standpoint, similar to the system that we currently have. Now, the fact that it would be outside of the purview of the government, I think is huge. I think that's massive, and that in and of itself makes it worthwhile.
Which means, and I think the thing that I have more confidence in than you might have less confidence in, but you might, if you maybe one day we'll meet on this, is my node isn't going to change the rules. I can tell you that for sure. My node is not going to have more than 21 Bitcoin. And I know that with many, many other people that know the same thing. And that means it imposes that rule set on governments as well. And it imposes the free market on governments. So governments serve us instead of us serving them. And it as the way it should look. Could I be wrong that a whole bunch of people decide to change Bitcoin to be able to centralize it and produce a whole bunch of different monetary value on it? I could be wrong. I suspect I'm not, because of conversations like this that move into kind of common knowledge of how important that is.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, just in my worldview, it's just like a thought experiment. I almost wish that Bitcoin would never be a global money. I almost wish that it would remain this in its own ecosystem. I hope that it evolves to the point where people can completely transact outside of the system if they so choose. But I hope that system wouldn't take over the global monetary system, because then you introduce all of these human flaws that I'm concerned about, right? Yeah. But if it stays it's in its own little esoteric ecosystem, then it's got a lower chance of being it's got a lower chance of what's the right word?
You're saying being co-opted.
Yeah.
I think so. What controls the Bitcoin network? We do, and so you have to advance a change to change something. You have to advance a change that is so powerful that it gets consensus. In fact, why the entire altcoin space exists is because you couldn't build on Bitcoin.
But hold on, George. Isn't Bitcoin, the job of Bitcoin to eliminate the flaws of like humans and our poor decision making? Aren't the incentives structured in a way to eliminate that?
That's my point. I don't think it ever will, Peter. I don't think it will. So if it just remains a way for people to unplug from the current system, who so choose, I think that's probably its biggest win. Because if it grows bigger than that, that's when I see the problems really starting to arise that take us right back to this system that we're in right now. You know, as an example, if the United States government abandoned the dollar and went to Bitcoin, well, now all of a sudden you're being taxed in Bitcoin, all these other things. You could have a similar type of surveillance, or at least the government spending, misallocating resources and whatnot. You wouldn't have the opportunity to unplug from the system. Whereas if the United States government stays on the dollar, and then we have this Bitcoin ecosystem that in 10 and 15 years allows people to let's say, transact 90% outside of that system, outside of the purview of the government, then I think that's probably the best case scenario.
Hold on, but you talk about trade-offs. I would take that trade-off.
Which trade-off?
The trade-off whereby I would rather live in an entire system that includes the government, which is Bitcoin-based, than feel like I need Bitcoin to be the outsider from the fiat space.
But then
I take that
as
trade-off.
long as you realize what you're risking, because as long as you realize that, in my view, and Jeff might not agree with this, but in my view, you're likely going to have fractional reserve lending, which would increase the supply of Bitcoin. You're likely going to have government spending pretty much at the same percentage of GDP that it is now. You're pretty much not going to get rid of any of the problems that you have right now.
Yeah, but is it not? Sorry, is it just? Are we talking in binaries here? I don't mind if it doesn't eliminate. What I like the idea is trending down. It's a bit like when I had my conversation with Eric Voorhees and we talked about the size of government. He's like, don't talk to me about anarchism and zero government. I just want government to just shrink by 1%. You know, is it more about the trajectory? The incentives improve the trajectory of society.
So my point is, if you don't change the attitude of people, I don't know how Bitcoin reduces the size of government. Now you can sit there and talk.
I'll tell you how.
Let me be clear, because people, your listeners will automatically say, well, deficit spending, because the government can't print money. But what I'm referring to specifically is just the tax revenue that's generated. So that has nothing to do with money printing. That has nothing.
Let me throw in Jeff and leave it to you. I'm just going to say one thing on there. The really interesting thing about living in the world of Bitcoin and meeting Bitcoiners is that I've seen countless people who have had their attitudes changed on so many things because of Bitcoin. It's kind of shifted the way you think about a lot of different things. This is the time preference safety he talks about. And I'm not a safety fan. Like, me and him don't get on. But I completely agree with him on time preference. I felt it and seen it myself. So I think that's the thing. The incentives of Bitcoin does shift the attitudes of people. But right, over to you, Jeff.
How does that change government spending?
So I'll tell you exactly using your numbers.
Okay.
That 90% of transactions happen on Bitcoin, and that means 10% happen in government spending. What would have to be the tax rate of that 10%? What would that do to government? It would break government.
No. I'm saying they're taxing Bitcoin. You're paying taxes in Bitcoin.
No, but again, how?
No, I'm saying if Bitcoin was the currency.
No, you said no. You said I hope for a parallel system that 90% of transactions happen outside of the existing system.
Okay, now you're talking about, so.
Yeah, I hope that happens.
Right.
What would happen to the remaining, how fast would the government be insolvent on the 10%? And that's where
no,
this
because they're gonna charge you tax, because you're gonna have the same monetary system. You're gonna have the same GDP, Jeff. It's just gonna be half Bitcoin and half dollars, and therefore the government is going to tax you. And if you have to take some of your Bitcoin and turn it into dollars to pay that tax, and that's exactly what you're going to have to do.
Yeah. So then what you're saying
You're
is
not going to be able to say, hey, government, you don't know about these transactions, therefore I'm not going to claim this as far as income. That people aren't going to do.
So I'm telling you that will happen, but
Jeff,
it doesn't matter
Jeff,
if
that I think is such a low probability. The average Joe and Jane, if they're looking at 20 years in prison, if they cheat on their taxes, and you're saying that they're not going to claim their Bitcoin income, I think that probability. Now, maybe there are some people out there that are, try to live their life incognito and whatnot, but I think that is an incredibly low percentage.
George, you said, and this is why I'm trying to get the kind of the second and third order derivatives of what you said. You said, I hope that there's a parallel system that's outside of the government system.
Right.
Okay. So, and then that grows and grows and grows. And what I'm saying is it can't. That parallel system imposes cost onto the existing system that changes the existing system. And as people move to that parallel system, which is more efficient, which is lower cost, which is low transaction fees, is more deflationary, it imposes a cost. As that cost is imposed, governments have two choices. Get on side with it and reduce government.
But let's compare to a CBDC, Jeff. What's the cost? Bitcoin compared to a CBDC, what's the cost there? Because transaction CBDC is going to be lower.
No, it is not.
Absolutely is.
No,
it's going to be free. You're talking about the infinite size of a central bank's balance sheet. If they don't want to charge you for a transaction, they're not going to charge you.
Okay, so right now they're all talking about doing it on a blockchain, right? A blockchain is just an expensive database.
Doing it on a blockchain.
So just let's say the digital euro and everything else. They're talking about creating a new blockchain that is just an expensive database. Right, so you already have a database. You already have a ledger of money, a broken ledger of money that's sitting in different databases, and you have Bitcoin, which is imposing a cost tied to energy. That is a new ledger.
Okay.
On top of Bitcoin, you have Lightning, and you have something new coming that's called Fediment and Fediments. That is, the transaction cost is negligible.
But it's not free.
Almost free.
But not free. CBDC, you're talking about free.
Yeah. So what you're getting at is abundance in money creates scarcity everywhere else. Scarcity in money creates abundance. So what you're talking about is an existing system that can print money out of nothing, abundance in money, creating scarcity everywhere else, that most people are going to look through. And their life is going to be getting harder and harder and harder, even though they think they're making that short-term trade-off. I want more money, but things are getting harder, just like they're making today. And in Bitcoin, it's imposing that scarcity, which creating abundance.
Yeah, I think that's a stretch too, to sit there and say that scarcity equals abundance. I don't think you can say that. There's a lot of variables in there, Jeff.
I mean, but again, because prices fall to the marginal cost of production, scarcity in money will create abundance over time. Abundance in money will create scarcity, which we see, which you can see. It is creating more monetary units, even if they're free. You're not measuring the externalities of the free.
But you're not measuring the let's look at just productivity, for heaven's sakes. Look at how many variables are there. Look at how many government variables go into productivity. And in fact, and you know just as well as I do, productivity has been going down the last 3 years.
So it's been going down because you're measuring it through GDP and you're changing the denominator. GDP, where is your calculator app in GDP? Where are your photos in GDP? These things, as they become more productive, they become free and they're out of GDP.
Okay, look,
in other words, you need to create more money
involved. It's going to reduce productivity.
Of course, but why does government grow? Because people can't pay their bills, and they'll vote for more government so they can pay their bills. That's why government grows in the first place. You have correlation and causation backwards.
No, you're sitting there saying that if we go into this, that we gradually go into this parallel ecosystem, which I'm all in favor for, that this is going to create so much wealth that people, once we get that next pandemic, people aren't going to vote for stimulus checks because they're all going to be so wildly wealthy that they're not going to want to increase the size of government. And I
have a very hard
time believing that. And I think that even if you create that parallel system where you've got, let's say, 2% deflation per year. If we look at the 1800s, that's exactly what we had. And people still chose to borrow money at a lower price. They still chose the higher interest rate, and they still chose to, when the stuff hit the fan, that let's just go ahead and take that temporary fix.
So I agree with you. So when that temporary fix came in and all the monetary easing came into the U.S., Bitcoin was about $4,000, and then it went up to $70,000 or $60-something thousand as a result of that. And it just and again, it didn't care. It was measuring this in advance, right, of what's happening on the liquidity. It just keeps on moving. So will people vote for more stimulus? Yes. And it will debase their currency further? Yes. Will they get poorer out of that? Yes. Will government get bigger out of that? Yes. But not in Bitcoin.
I hope you're right. Again, I don't think that we disagree on the dynamics too much. I just think that we disagree on the probabilities of what Bitcoin will do to human decision making around money.
George, is there a chance that you mentioned earlier you wish more people would just vote for smaller government? Can you not run the thought experiment whereby a successful Bitcoin doesn't entirely change the role and structure of government, but it puts restraints on them that does reduce their size?
What type of restraint? Give me an example, Peter.
Like they don't have access to an infinite money printer. Like enough people have learned about the ills of...
Let's walk through that. Let's go back prior to 2007. How did the government print money? Or let me be very specific here. How did the government impact M2 money supply?
You will know better than me.
They didn't. It's a trick question. It's a trick question. They didn't. So if we look at, let's say, M2 from 1980 to 2007, we'll just use that time frame as an example. A lot of people would point to the Fed's balance sheet. They said, well, the Fed, they increased the size of their balance sheet. Then we have a money multiplier. So as the bank reserves increase, this increases balance sheet capacity for the banks, which allows them to lend. So yes, George, we get it, that it's really about the commercial banks, but at the end of the day, it's all about the Fed and the Fed's balance sheet. So the Fed's balance sheet in 1980, as far as bank reserves, about 40 billion with a B. In 2007, same, 40 billion. But M2 money supply went from 1.5 trillion up to 7.5 trillion. See, the central bank really didn't have anything to do with that. So what we're talking about there, Peter, is the vast, vast, vast majority of money supply that we have in the world, especially dollars outside the United States, is specifically created through bank lending, which has nothing to do with the Fed's balance sheet because it's in a system that's pretty much cashless and reserveless. So
until those banks
reserve lending. So if we have fractional reserve lending, Peter, even in a Bitcoin standard, it takes you right back to where we are today because government has very, very little control. Now, it is true that they have control over the aggregate balance sheet, which is a very interesting thought experiment. So in other words, let's just say that they start deficit spending. So that creates more treasuries. But then they're just taking existing M2 and spending it right back. So the net impact on M2 is nothing. It's the exact same. But yet now you have more treasuries. So what they've done is they've increased the actual balance sheet, the aggregate balance sheet, the purchasing power, assuming that these banks can create as much currency as they want based on perceived counterparty risk, which is exactly what happens. So that's an interesting question. It's can the government increase or decrease the aggregate balance sheet? Answer is yes. And how does that impact inflation or purchasing power? But as far as the government's ability to create more currency units, outside of a couple times in history, you just don't see it. It's all the commercial banking system, which goes back to why Bitcoin being full reserve or fractional reserve is such an important question.
So, which I totally agree with that. And then the question is, so today, what was the company Peter, that you were talking about that sponsored your podcast?
Binance?
BlockFi.
Or no,
BlockFi. Which means that there is a free market element in this, that BlockFi is trying to be the new bank. FTX is trying to be the new bank. And there's going to be many others, including many of the retail banks today, that are going to try to be the new banks on top of the existing Bitcoin rails. And what I think potentially the only point of disagreement in this is George believes that those will all win and then it'll be fractional reserved. And I believe that if as long as Bitcoin stays decentralized and secure, they'll blow up. Over.
I think a lot of them will, but that's what people. I think that's a good way to summarize kind of our differences, Jeff.
Yeah, and then because the only reason that they couldn't blow now, if you go back to M2, the government's role in this is the only reason that they don't blow up, which is similar to our existing financial system, is if the government makes them whole. We have the existing financial system, and it gets worse and worse, right? And Bitcoin imposes this, that they will blow up.
But just to be fair, in that world, that the government could bail them out with money that's generated from taxation that people are willing to give to the government, even in they're giving their Bitcoin.
That's what I mean. Or a government is running an inflationary monetary policy, running their own currency against Bitcoin. You could print more monetary units to be able to bail them out, and you would. But ultimately, the free market, essentially, Bitcoin imposes a free market discipline that governments can't get away from either on this, and citizens will also see this, right? But that is the nugget of what we're talking about, and I believe that if Bitcoin, so I believe in the ethos of Bitcoin. When I'm talking about if it stays decentralized and secure, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. If it stays decentralized and it's secure, all of this nonsense that will happen, it doesn't matter. The free market's going to win, and it's repricing everything else.
Yeah, I think well said. And I think it just distilling it down, it's all about fractional reserve versus full reserve, and how will people vote in that world.
Yeah.
I think we've reached a nice natural conclusion. Any closing thoughts, Jeff?
No, I thought this was really good. I think these types of conversations where you might have some difference, but you can explore that difference kind of in an open way, respectful way. I think they're helpful to a whole bunch of other people that may be watching. So thanks for doing this, George.
Very well. I applaud you, Jeff, and people like Lynn who are out there putting your money where your mouth is and trying to create that parallel system that even if I believe it will have maybe some more flaws based on human nature, it's still going to give us people who value freedom and liberty and privacy and free market capitalism a way to unplug to a certain degree from the system, which I think is coming our way.
And George, I am just a simple podcast host, and I asked you a question a moment ago where I'm really just repeating things people have told to me, and you've given me a very solid answer. I think it'd be great to do another one-on-one with you at some point soon, just to go through some of these things and have you explain it, how you see these systems work.
Yeah, there's so many bumper stickers out there that are, in my opinion, inaccurate, but people believe them to be true because they've just been said over and over and over again. I'm no fan of fiat currency, but I do believe that people really don't understand they believe that because we have fiat currency that we have way more money supply today than we otherwise would. And I think if they just actually look at the data, it would shock them, just like that number that we talked about, looking at M2 at the late 1880s compared to today, and how today it's gone up at the exact same rate. So either we didn't really constrain money supply back then, or fiat currency really hasn't created more currency units than we otherwise would have.
Well, I'd love to go through that with you. So I'll ask Danny to give it a few weeks and then try and book something in, because you certainly make me rethink some things today. Thank you to both of you. I think people are going to love this. I think there was a lot of common ground, and there was some fair debate on some of the key points. I'm sure we can do it again in the future, but appreciate you both. And Jeff, I'm sure I'm going to see you in person soon. And George, I don't know if I'll ever get to meet you in person, but either way, we have the internet, so we can do it this way. Thank you both. Jeff, everyone knows who you are, what you do. It's all ego death. It's the price of tomorrow. But George, what do you want to tell people where to go?
Oh, they can just go to my YouTube channel. It's George Gammon, or they can check out the Rebel Capitalist channel. I'm not sure when this will air, but we're starting a new website that's rather crude right now, but we're building it. It's called rebelcapitalist.com, and that's going to be kind of a news aggregator, very similar to Zero Hedge. So we're excited about that project for sure.
Well, I'm excited about that. Jeff, is there anywhere you want to send people?
No, all good. You did it. Thanks.
All right. Well, on behalf of Jeff, go to railbedford.com. All right. Thank you both. See you soon.
All right, bye, guys.
Thanks.